Hey guys, Stockaholics, thanks for being here today. If you have been following me for a little while, you will know that I am a major oil and oil tanker bull. But for today, I would like to talk a little bit about something, and that is war in the Middle East and kind of how it would influence these kinds of investments. But I would like to say that I hope that war doesn't come. I would rather not see that. That's not something that I would include in my primary thesis for my positions. If I didn't have to profit from such events, I wouldn't. But I do think that they will likely have a large impact on the oil and oil tanker companies. So I guess the quote for today to kind of exemplify all of these things is to pray for peace, but to prepare for war. So what could war do to oil? We'll be explaining this in kind of four major topics. The first of which, recent events. Second of which, oil in previous Middle Eastern conflicts. The third thing we'll be talking about, oil shipping routes, particularly for how these kinds of things could impact oil tankers. And fourth, the section I would suggest you guys most tune out for, conspiracy theory time.
Good evening, friends. Stephen Benoon with Israeli News Live. We have breaking news coming out of the Middle East. They're right on the border of Iraq and Syria. Yet another Iranian official, this time an Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander, targeted by a drone. No doubt Israel, once again, United States, who knows, both these countries are preparing for a war with Iran. And we know that, as I had mentioned on Fact News Network just moments ago in another breaking news story there, that the United States President Donald Trump is at Camp David. He's been there for about a week meeting with his generals there. He's done a shakeup at the Pentagon. They are getting ready to go to war with Iran. Mossad intel that we've been getting in as well. Iran and Israel are going to go to blows very shortly. They're preparing. Now we have our good friend, Israeli journalist, sending information that Hezbollah has basically running for the hills, knowing as they're leaving their post in the Lebanon Valley, knowing that Iran has made the decision to strike. And seeing this here, another one of their officials being shot and killed. Iran has already said they would not tolerate any more hit and runs. It says here, an airstrike killed a commander of the Iran's Revolutionary Guard at the Iraq-Syria border sometime between Saturday and Sunday. Iraqi security and local militia officials said on Monday they could not confirm the identity of the commander, who they said was killed alongside three other men traveling in a vehicle with him. The vehicle was carrying weapons across the Iraqi border and was hit after it had entered Syrian territory, two Iraqi security officials separately said. Iran-backed Iraqi parliamentary groups helped retrieve the bodies, the two officials said, without elaborating or giving the exact time of the incident. Local military and militia sources confirmed the account, although Reuters was unable to verify independently that an Iranian commander had been killed. Anyway, I'm Steve Benoon. You're listening to Israeli News Live. Please do support the broadcast. Visit our website, israelinewslive.org. We thank you kindly.
So early in this year, the news cycles were largely focused on Iranian conflict. If you remember kind of the memes of early 2020, it was that World War III is coming and all the Zoomers are going to have to get drafted and those kinds of things, right? So on January 3rd, this man, Qasem Soleimani, was successfully targeted in a drone strike and killed. So he was a top Iranian commander, and he was in Iraq for some reason at the time. Donald Trump ordered this man killed. whether you agree or disagree with that, it happens, right? After that, a few days later, Iran retaliated symbolically. They launched a whole bunch of missiles at some U.S. And Iraqi bases housing U.S. soldiers. I believe they gave them fair warning that these missiles were coming, so the soldiers kind of prepared for that, and there wasn't any fatal casualties. Now, I believe there were some injuries from this, but for the most part, kind of a symbolic retaliation for attacking this man. Yeah. But later in the year, as we know, the virus kind of shifted our focus away from the Middle East, and at the same time, it probably de-escalated some of the tensions because both Iran and the United States wanted to focus more on the more prevalent issue at the time, the cerveza sickness. So that's kind of been the main, driver of the year. But as many of us know, Biden was declared the president by the Associated Press later in the year, around November. And you might say, well, why does this matter for tensions in the Middle East? I would say that this is a very significant event. If we think about Mr. Biden's policies, particularly when he was in the vice president with Obama, we would expect that he would continue some of the policies that he had in his prior administration. Now, you might say, well, okay, well, he's gonna maybe they'll de-escalate situation in the Middle East. Okay, but we have to think about some of our allies in the Middle East too. One of those is Israel, and Israel, anticipating a Biden administration in the next year, is making some decisions now to kind of handicap Biden, and particularly to handicap a major enemy of them, that is in Iran. So because Israel knows that it is very likely for Biden to come into office next year, and yeah, I know there's all kinds of drama regarding that. That's not going to get into that in this video, but in any case, Israel feels it necessary to escalate the situation in the Middle East. They don't want Iran to have nuclear capabilities. They see that as an existential threat to their existence in the Middle East. So that has led to some of these events. In November 30th to December 1st, in anticipation of a Biden president, Israel has escalated the situation in the Middle East. So they want to damage any possibility of some kind of brokerage between Biden and Iran. They don't want to see a coming back of the nuclear deal that they had previously. They see that as a threat to them. So you've seen some recent events. Iran says Israel killed one of their nuclear scientists. So I believe that to be true. There's been some assassinations. This isn't the first, and it probably won't be the last, of nuclear scientists in Iran. On top of that, there was a very recent drone strike that has killed a top commander in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. The culprit of that has yet to be determined, but it is likely either Israel or the United States. But this is not a news channel. This is an investment channel. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what a potential war in the Middle East, particularly with Iran, could mean for oil and oil-based investments. So if we look at this graph here, we'll be talking about some of the insights that we can glean from some prior conflicts in the Middle East. So let's do that. The first one was the Gulf War in 1990. So there was a few months before the conflict actually started where the price of oil skyrocketed. I think this might have been when Iraq invaded Kuwait. perhaps it was disruptive to the oil supply, and thus as a result the price skyrocketed, right? But you can see these last couple of months, last several months here, in the middle of that was during the American invasion, during the Gulf Storm. But the issue was actually quite swiftly resolved, and the price of oil quickly resumed the trend as that issue of war ended. In this period right here, in the period leading up to the dot-com bubble, we can see that there was a period of economic expansion. I believe that led to some oil demand growth, but the bubble popped over here, and simultaneously on the other side of that bubble pop, we as Americans went through an event, September 11th, 2001, with the World Trade attacks and so on, that led to a not so good situation in oil. We did very swiftly enter Afghanistan, but Afghanistan isn't central to the world oil supply. So with a diminished oil demand, without a disruption to the supply, the price declined. But in about 2002, we invaded Iraq, and that's when we started to see disruption in the oil supply, Iraq being a major oil exporter. And the location, which I'll talk about in the next slide, very significant geographical location to oil exports. So as you can see, as that war kind of dragged on and escalated, with simultaneous growth in the American economy, the price of oil moved. So you saw both a demand increase with a supply constriction because of oil, because of this war. Over here, we had, of course, the global financial crisis. So this wasn't particularly related to the war, but you know, tensions in the Middle East, and we still had an American presence. Could argue that this portion right here was could be related to that as well, for potential supply constrictions. Yeah. So what could oil disruption look like in the next war? First of all, I want to show you the country of Iraq. Geographically, very tiny segment of it has access to the Persian Gulf, right? So during the last conflicts, particularly involving Iraq, not that big of a deal in terms of these other countries, Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, getting oil exports going throughout, particularly in the Gulf of Oman, right? But if conflict is to come out in Iran, well, there could be some very significant consequences for that compared to the last conflict, right? So I want you to look at some of these exports down here, particularly the dollar amounts. So these are the top 8 countries in terms of net oil exports, in terms of the dollar amount. You see Saudi Arabia is a country right here. A lot of their oil needs to go out in the Persian Gulf. However, I guess some of it could come out in the Red Sea. We have Russia, not on here. Iraq, which is at the back of the Persian Gulf. Their oil needs to come out in this Persian Gulf to be exported over here. We have Canada, not particularly relevant over here. The UAE, right here. It's in a precarious position in relation to Iran, if a conflict were to erupt over there. Kuwait, same thing. Kuwait, very large exporter of oil. And Nigeria's not here. Okay. But I guess what I'm trying to show you is that all of these major oil exporting countries, they all have to get their oil through the Persian Gulf and through the Gulf of Oman. If you have a hostile Iran who is in a crappy position, they could do some serious damage by escalating conflict in this location. That could cause significant supply disruptions in oil if that isn't secured by American and Israeli forces, right? So something to consider, I think. Okay, so this is kind of a map, just a general map of oil shipping routes. All right, I guess just briefly talk about this and some of my thoughts around it, right? So if there were a Middle Eastern war, particularly in Iran, the supply of oil from the Middle East would be the portion that we would see disruption from. Now, what that would mean for tankers, during the initial portions of the conflict, there would likely be a disruption. There would be some kind of catalyst event, similar to like the contango situation where shipping routes would get all kinds of disorganized. So I think that would, what I believe that could do initially for a brief period of time, is that would escalate rates in because of a shock kind of scenario. All of these tankers over here, they'd want to, you know, probably get the hell out of there because they don't want to get bombed by Iran or whatever, get involved in a conflict, right? So it would be disruptive and probably make rates elevate extremely high, right? But what would we think if there was an extended period of time where there's a conflict in Iran? Well, we'd have to think about where the oil would need to come from to kind of make up for the deficit. So that would mean that it would need to go from, particularly from the United States to some countries in South America, to Europe, and we'd probably see some oil tankers somehow, I don't know, go from some other major oil producers. I know there's a major one in Nigeria. I know Russia is has major sources of oil, and if the price of oil escalates to a certain point, they would be highly incentivized to get that onto a ship too, right? Now, as to how all of this would work, that would take more research, and I'm going to do it. If you guys know any more about this, I would be very curious. Anybody that's massively could understand this dynamic and how this would affect shipping, let me know in the comments. I would be greatly interested. Okay, guys, conspiracy theory time. What this map is a map of global oil production over the past decade. Now you notice some trends. South America, it's been in decline over the past decade. Europe, they have very little oil production, but that's been in decline. Africa's been in decline. Middle East has been in decline except for natural gas. Asia's been in decline, and also Eastern Europe, Russia, this area, been in decline. But the outlier in all of this, and this global oil production order, I guess, has been North America, particularly the United States. Over the past 10 years, the United States has gone from a net importer of oil, which is where all of these other ones has declined, from a net exporter. So it's kind of shifted that whole dynamic with the United States and North America producing oil, right? And again, this is primarily because of the fracking industry and because of all of the money that has, and capital that has poured into that industry. So one point earlier in the year, right, during March and April, when the pandemic first started, we saw Russia and we saw Saudi Arabia expecting that there would be a demand decrease in oil, simultaneously decide to quote unquote go to war and produce tons of oil. Now, I would argue, I don't think that they were doing that, particularly because either one was fighting the other one. Because these, if you see this this map, and these people and these countries are major oil producers, with vast portions of their economy based on oil. So I would expect that they would understand this. They didn't do this because they saw each other as a threat, but rather that was kind of a front because they wanted to eliminate this. Now, fracking isn't needs a relatively higher price compared to some of those other countries to maintain profitability, right? So they wanted to decrease the price to kind of eliminate these industries. They know particularly that these industries are private in the United States. So if they go bankrupt, especially with the zeitgeist in the United States, with the Democratic Party and all of that, that is anti-oil, that they would be able to defeat American oil, right? But all of that to me kind of seems like not so much a conspiracy. This is the thing that I think is kind of more of a conspiracy. So I was thinking, United States has some smart people too. These these countries, they got a lot of smart people, and so does the United States. So I was thinking, particularly with this escalation with Israel, which arguably would be because of the incoming Biden administration, I was thinking that this would also be an opportune time to go to war for the United States, right? Now you think about it. If the United States has become a net exporter of oil and it needs high oil prices to maintain profitability, how could the United States and North America get back at Saudi Arabia and get back and compete with Russia and take market share? Start a conflict in the Middle East, escalate tensions, attack Iran, put them in a shitty situation, make them forced to retaliate, and then it'll cause a disruption. So not only does it benefit our allies in the Middle East, we can maintain that military doctrine with regional power with our allies, but we can control the supply of oil. Hey, so if you made it this far, appreciate you guys hanging out. I would greatly appreciate a like. If you think I'm a psychopath and my ideas don't make no sense, I'd love to hear from you and comment below. Until next time.